Hey everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Open Forum podcast. Today we have with us a returning guest, Senator Malcolm Roberts. Malcolm Roberts is the Senator for Queensland, Australia. And today we're going to be talking about climate change, more specifically about climate alarmism. Now, if you guys aren't too familiar with what that is, that's fantastic. That's what we're here to kind of fill you in on, really. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to hand the mic over to Malcolm. Now, you're familiar with Malcolm from the last episode we've had. So what I'm going to do straight off the bat is I'm going to ask him to just give us a little explanation as to what the differences are between weather and climate. And then from there, we're going to just dive on in. Malcolm, over to you.
Okay, let's give a simple explanation first. The weather is the state of the atmosphere right now, the weather we're experiencing. Climate is weather averaged out over 3 decades. I think it could even be longer than that, but I think that they've come to an understanding that it's 3 decades for the purposes of this climate discussion. So let me just go to the dictionary definition of weather. The state of the atmosphere with respect to wind, temperature, cloudiness, moisture, pressure, snow, precipitation, etc., etc. So the climate, though, is the composite or generally prevailing weather conditions of a region as temperature, air pressure, humidity, precipitation, sunshine throughout the year, averaged over a series of years. So as I said, over 30 years, for example.
Grand. So that sort of tells us a little bit about what weather is. It's the thing that we experience day to day, and then what the climate is in the sense of it takes a very long time for us to, one, establish what the climate is, and then two, see if there is something in the realms of climate change. And actually, as we spoke about right before we kicked off, the climate does change, and there is an element of climate change throughout the decades, throughout the years, throughout the centuries. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about that climate variability and how the climate changing is actually a normal thing?
Yes, and we have to discuss what is meant by the term change, climate change. So, but you hit the key word, variability. Variation exists in everything. I mean, you've got hair on your head, but it's much shorter than mine. You've got a receding hairline. So have I, just here. All right, that's the way we were built. Not everyone's got those features. Your skin is darker than mine. Not everyone's got those features. You know, everyone. I don't know how tall you are, but I'm only about 165 centimeters, maybe even shrinking a bit because of that since then. So you're probably here, much taller than that.
A little bit, yeah.
Well, you're way taller than I am. So, but you're still human, and I'm still human, despite our eyes being different color, our hair lengths being different color, our heights being different, our skin colors being different. So you're human, I'm human. That's the natural variability, because your ancestors came from a different place than mine. And that's fine. Even if you go to a very homogeneous race, like, for example, the Pygmies or the Zulus or the Japanese, you'll still find variability. People will be varying heights. There's some very tall Japanese. There's some very short Japanese, right? So, but they're still all Japanese. And so you have variation. It exists in everything. An Olympic swimmer, a champion athlete, will swim the 100 meters freestyle in similar time every time he or she swims, but not exactly the same time. There's natural variation. So what I did was draw this up as we discussed beforehand. So here we've got something, for example, it could be temperature, right? It could be temperature in the atmosphere, the maximum temperature. It could be a minimum temperature. It could be average temperature for a day. But that's temperature varying every day. Now, all of a sudden, we get a sudden spike. That is a change. This is not a change. This is natural, inherent variation. Everything varies. Everything varies. And then we have a lift in the process, and the temperature goes to something higher. That might be rainfall for a year. Now, in nature, you're not going to get a sudden jump in rainfall or temperature like that, but over the years. But you'll have a more gradual rise up to that if the climate is changing. But the point I'm trying to show is natural variation, inherent variation in everything. a change in the process. There is no evidence that there is a change in the climate at all, not in temperature, not in rainfall, not in snowfall, not in ocean alkalinity. There is no change whatsoever. We've got this from the experts. They have analyzed the data. We've also amassed 24,000 data sets through our own researchers. There is no evidence of any change in climate. There is continuing, compelling evidence of variability in climate. But when people, you gave me an example, if it's a hot week today or this week, or even a hot day, that is not evidence the climate has changed. That's evidence of natural variation. That's all that is. So this might be a hot week, cold week, hot week, cold week.
Yeah.
There is no evidence of climate change. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things to highlight there is that you mentioned that it doesn't stay stable around the same 2 temperature points for max hot, max cold as well. And that over time, gradually, with the natural progression of climate on the planet, this may go upwards, it may go downwards. In fact, if we go back towards the 70s, I think it was, there was cooling going on. The trend at that point in time was that the global temperature on average was cooling. And the thought was that we were going to go into a global ice age. There are news articles that are saying that the UK would have a Siberian temperament climate by the year 2020. Now, if anyone was in the UK last week, as I was, then they would see that actually there was a bit of a heat wave and all the grass had gone a bit brown because there's a little bit of lack of precipitation. So not quite Siberia yet, but these things do change. And I think an important thing is, as you've mentioned, there is growing evidence to say
I don't think they change, Sonny. They might not change, but they do vary.
Yes.
It's when you get that step change or the gradual increase, something that's unusual, that's when a change occurs. But there's been no change. There has been continuing variability. Yes.
Yeah, that continuing variability. But the cycles that we've been looking at are too small in order to see those changes, because like we've already established, the climate is established over 3 decades or more. But if we're looking over it over a period of 10 years, the variability that we're going to see is so huge that all of a sudden it looks like this crazy thing that's occurring. Yet if you look at temperature variabilities at the early 1900s in comparison to now, it doesn't look all that different because it's a cyclic thing that occurs with all this variability. But moving on to that, what about the known effects of humans for this then? Because we are burning greenhouse gases, we are burning fossil fuels, and at the end of the day, climate alarmism, where it's being pushed to, or better yet, before we go there, what is climate alarmism? We've kind of established climate change, we've established weather and climate. What is climate alarmism before we start talking about it, just so everyone's on the same level, on the same page?
Okay, before we go into climate alarmism, which I'm happy to talk about, let's come back to something you mentioned. It's fundamental, cycles. There are so many cycles. There's a daily cycle. There's a seasonal cycle, which is annual in our case on this planet. There are cycles of 11 years on some climate variables. There are cycles of 20 years on some climate variables. There are cycles of 150 million years on some variables. And that's when we go through our solar system, as we revolve around the sun. Our solar system, the whole solar system, goes through a different part of the galaxy, and we have different amounts of particles bombarding our solar system from other galactic, what do you call it?
Galaxies,
interstellar bodies, and other stars and so on, radiating. And when we go through that, those particles hit our solar system. They come through our atmosphere, and they affect the amount of cloud we get. And if we get more cloud, then the sun's warmth gets bounced back into the back towards the sun. So we are cooler. So there are cycles going from days to weeks to years to decades to millennia to millions of years. And so when you have all of these all coming together, you end up with natural variation. And so clearly, when we go through that other galaxy or near that other galaxy, that is a change in climate. And what we'll have is temperatures going down because we have more cloud cover, and we'll probably have higher rainfall as well. So that's a change in climate. So the temperature graph will be going along like that and go down. The rainfall graph might go like that, variable, and then go increase. So that is a change. Now, climate alarmism is something that's been fabricated by a man called Maurice Strong from the United Nations. He was Under Secretary General of the United Nations Environmental Program. He's dead now. He died in 2015. But Maurice Strong was an incredible intellect, but even more so, he was a very powerful networker. He could get people to do almost anything for him, and he could work not just individually with one-on-one, but work through groups. Very powerful man. And he had two aims in life, and he said these aims quite publicly. One was to put in place an unelected socialist global governance. The other one was to return us to pre-industrial era. In other words, he said specifically he wants to de-industrialize Western civilization, send us back to the caves. So as part of that objective, he used many different fears to try and move people. And climate alarm has been fabricated. What they do is they take the natural variation, and when we have a high temperature, they say, oh my goodness, it's hot, the planet is going to cook. It's just natural variability. So climate alarmism is a fabricated fear that's been concocted to drive people, to control people, so that they will do what the United Nations and policies are, and what the government policies are in Britain with regard to shutting down the use of energy, making sacrifices, not traveling, and so on. So it's really an element of control. And all the way through history, Sonny, we've seen examples of people trying to control others using fear. And so always beneath control, there is fear. And so these people want to try and control us. And so climate change, what they're doing there is no climate change, there's natural climate variability. And what they're using is each of the little spikes, each of the variations, to claim climate alarm and say that it's unusual. But if you go and talk to farmers who've been, say, in their 70s or 80s, or you go and talk to a geologist, they know there's nothing happening. We've got the data now, 24,000 data sets showing the graphs of all the climate and weather variables. There's no change going on, none at all. And so they're just fabricating the alarm. And then, you know, what we have ridiculous scenes out here. Australia is known for having massive floods and droughts. When we have a flood, the news reports it, and there's all kinds of catastrophe and words are terrible and scary. And then they say, this is the biggest flood for 50 years. Well, what does that tell you? It was bigger 50 years ago. Yeah. And we know that in our records. The floods were bigger, the droughts were longer, more severe. The temperatures in Australia were warmer in the 1880s and 1890s than today. The heat waves were hotter, warmer, longer, and more severe. The drought was more severe in 120 years ago. In America, there are 35 states that have their hottest temperature records in the 1930s and 1940s.
The Dust Bowl, yeah.
The 1930s and 1940s were far warmer in America.
Yeah, that's part of that time was also through their agricultural practices with the Dust Bowl, right? In the 1930s America situation, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they learned from that. And humans are wonderful because humans actually learn from things like that. And we recognize that our farming practices caused that. And so we don't have that again. But they had a drought. I remember talking to some Native Americans in Arizona or Utah, can't remember where it was. They told us about a drought that was 1,000 years long. That's climate change. That is climate change.
I didn't see that one in the last
That was many
BBC
thousands of years
report.
ago.
Yeah.
No, you won't see David Attenborough talking about it either because they make too much money out of spreading fear.
Yeah, and just coming back to something that you said with regards to the impact of other celestial bodies on the Earth and the impact of clouds and things. If anyone wants to look that up, what Malcolm's talking about, that's actually a method that's used to look at the warming and of the Earth as well in terms of the albedo of the Earth. And what they do is they measure that to see the reflectivity of the Earth, and so that's, you know, if you wanted to look that up and see what Malcolm's talking about there, by all means. And then another thing that you said was using fear to control. And it's one of the easiest ways for governments or authoritative figures to get control of people, to implement fear and use that as a weapon. And it's something we've seen over the last couple of years. And it's something that we've seen, or that we're actually seeing as well in terms of the climate. Because as you also mentioned in that same sentence, is you have the UK talking about shutting down energy over the winter, having blackouts. You've got Germany and Hamburg. They have said that they're probably going to have to use warming tents because they're going to have to shut down the heating supply over the winter because they've just not got enough energy. And it's just compliance. There's no one rioting or protesting at the thought of, hey, listen, we live in the developed Western society. How are you talking about we're going to run out of energy because you shut down a few plants? And actually, Germany, for me, is the worst of it, because they have the capacity, and this is something that I want to talk to you about as well, in nuclear power plants, but they shut down 10 odd plants and now have a deficit in power. Yet nuclear power is a clean energy. But they're not going to restart those nuclear power plants. Instead, another thing that you mentioned, they'd rather push people into a feudal style living of having to use these warming tents because energy climate crisis. Sorry, guys. What? Don't worry about the nuclear power plants. No. They're not here anymore. We're shutting those down. It baffles the mind that this is happening. It's happening to us in front of our faces, and people just aren't saying boo. But with that said, then, why is it that people are just accepting it? People are just accepting the thought that the Great Barrier Reef was dying, even though, as you've pointed out a couple of times in Parliament in the recent weeks, that actually the Great Barrier Reef is having a resurgence and doing better than it has done.
Well, I think it's fairly simple. With humans, the majority of humans overwhelmingly are caring. We have a very strong sense of social cohesion and belonging as to our tribe, our family, our nation, which is all healthy. Because if we're united, see, we're very, very puny animals. Our ancestors could not have survived against a saber-toothed tiger. Just could not. The strongest man today, let's say Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he was in his prime, he would be nothing against a saber-toothed tiger. But together with other humans, even little fellas like me can kill a saber-toothed tiger and protect our families, providing we get together. So belonging is very important. We also have a very strong intellect, neocortex, that's unique in the animal species. We can rationalize things, we can collect data, we can come to logical decisions quite often. But at the base of our brain, we have a very primitive form of brain, which is it's known by various titles. I won't go into it right now, but what that caused us to do, when we, for example, it might be raining outside, and we look at the rain and we go, oh, that's water falling from the sky. If I go out in there, I'll get wet. If I get wet, I'll get a cold. I'll be in bed for a few days sick. I better get my raincoat. We don't do that. We just go grab the bloody raincoat and go, right? Now, so we form patterns of behavior, which are very much ingrained by the time we're 6. Maria Montessori was the most incredible person in terms of understanding human development, human behavior. So the critical years for the formation of both character and intellect are 0 to 6, birth to 6. A lot of our patterns, our view of the world are locked in at that time, by the time we get to 6. And we don't develop reasoning skills till 6. So what it means is that we have a lot of our reactions, our emotional reactions. You know, if you see a little kitten on the other side of the street, you don't get worried. But if you saw a lion escape from the zoo, you'd run straight back inside. You don't think, you don't process, that's a big cat, it could eat me, I better get back inside. You just get in the car, get back inside, that's it. So fear, fight, flight, and freeze are ingrained in us from our ancestors, because the ancestors who had them best ingrained survived and they passed those down to us. So we have this reaction that sometimes when we're afraid, we just react and then we come back and think about it later. But we also, how can we say it? That we can sometimes regulate that, but it takes us time to regulate it. And the other thing is that we want to belong. So what you'll find is that they will invoke something that shows you care. For example, if you care about the environment, you will believe this climate lie. But they don't say lie, of course. If you care about granny, you'll get an injection, a COVID injection. So what they're trying to do there is invoke our sense of belonging, so they can use that to control. So it's a very complex thing, but what they're trying to do is to invoke fear. When we have fear, we stop thinking with our neocortex. We stop the rational process. We just react, and away we go. And so en masse, if you combine the fact that we care, you combine a lie that we're hurting the climate when we're not, you combine the fact that it could hurt other people when it won't, but it could if the lie is believed, then you're tugging into all the things that make us very strong: care, belonging, intellect, and you're bypassing them, and you're just using fear to shut things down. And people go, oh my goodness, we better stop using coal. We better stop driving cars. We better stop. It's just insane, because when you look at these things, Sonny, there's nothing dirty about a coal-fired power station, a modern coal-fired power station. A coal-fired power station burns hydrocarbons: coal, oil, natural gas. So hydrocarbons contain carbon and hydrogen. When you burn them, you form, in oxygen, you form carbon dioxide, which is plant food and essential for life on this planet, and you form H2O, which is water vapor, essential for life on this planet. That's it. Now, some of the other impurities in coal and oil and natural gas that nature lays down include sulfur, nitrous oxides, particulates. Now, those are the real pollutants, and they're scrubbed out of the power stations these days. So coal-fired power stations actually produce a very clean form of energy, and so there's nothing wrong with a coal-fired power station. But what they do is they'll show you pictures of the old coal-fired power station producing real pollution, or they'll show you pictures of the water vapor being produced on a cold day, and they'll show it against a sunset, so it looks dirty, it looks filthy, but it's just water vapor. Carbon dioxide itself is colorless, odorless, tasteless. It's a natural trace gas. There is 0.04% of it in the Earth's atmosphere. 0.04. You're producing 100 times more carbon dioxide right now in your breath than a coal-fired than is in nature. So you're taking in atmosphere. We all are taking in atmosphere at 0.04% carbon dioxide. We're exhaling it at around 4 to 5%. And the plants are very grateful that you're doing that, because they need the carbon dioxide for the life cycle. The other thing, just to dispel this myth about carbon dioxide, so it's a very clean, odorless, tasteless, non-toxic gas, essential for all life on this planet. It's only a trace gas because there's bugger all of it. It's 0.04%. When we have a look, even small concentrations of some toxins can kill us. Arsenic, cyanide, for example, tiniest bit can kill us. But that's not the case with this, because carbon dioxide is not a toxin. And if you want to have a look at the impact of humans on carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, then have a look at the global financial crisis in 2008. That occurred at the end of 2008, you may remember. In 2009, because of the global financial crisis, we had a recession around virtually the whole world. Almost the whole world went into severe recession. That meant they used less energy. That meant they used less coal. That meant they produced less carbon dioxide from human activity. Yet the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere continued increasing. And I'll explain why in a minute. Then we had a second experiment in 2020. In 2020, we had a severe recession, almost a depression around the world because of government COVID restrictions. Not because of COVID, but because of government COVID restrictions. And again, in the recession in 2020, we had a decrease in the use of energy, less industrial activity. That meant less carbon dioxide produced from human activity. And yet the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere continued increasing. And the reason for that is that human activity produces about 3% of the carbon dioxide produced on Earth every year. So nature produces 97%, which is 32 times more. Nature also has enormous variation in its production of carbon dioxide. The level of variation in nature's production of carbon dioxide is more than our total production. And then if you look at the oceans contain in dissolved form around 50 to 70 times more carbon dioxide in dissolved form than is in the entire atmosphere. Slight changes in temperature of the oceans due to changes in the sun, which has natural variation, lead the oceans to either warm or cool. And if they warm, they release carbon dioxide. If they cool, they absorb carbon dioxide. And they completely overwhelm the human signal. And if you look at the carbon dioxide levels on a daily basis, in the summer, in your summer, the carbon dioxide levels, because the majority of the oceans are in the southern hemisphere, in your summer, you will find carbon dioxide levels going down because our ocean surfaces cool in the south and absorb more carbon dioxide than your oceans liberate. So the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere reduce. If you look at your northern hemisphere winter, our southern hemisphere summer, the surface temperatures increase, so we liberate carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide levels do this, regardless of what we do. And the overall trend is up because of some events that happened 1,000 years ago, because the oceans are so massive, they cover 71% of the Earth's surface up to 11 kilometers deep. And that's a lot of water.
Yeah.
And so we are just puny. And to anyone to think that we can change the climate because of our exhaled air, they're just delusional. And because of and the figures just completely disprove it. We can, though, change regional climate. If we cut down and deforest an area, then we will change the climate in that region. For example, if we build a lot of houses, Phoenix is an example of this in America. Phoenix is in a very dry area of Arizona, but because of the damming of rivers and the growth in population of Phoenix and the sheer number of swimming pools, Phoenix is now more humid than it used to be. So we can change the climate on a regional or small scale basis over a city. We know that the temperature, and due to the urban heat island effect, because of the reflection of asphalt and concrete and steel and glass, cities have a slightly higher temperature today than they did, than small towns did 100 years ago. So a city anywhere will be warmer, but that's how we can affect the climate. But it's tiny and it's only a very small area. It's not global. We are having no impact on the global climate.
It's interesting that, well, first off, it's really important that we do make note of that regional climate, the impact that we can have, and also that you mentioned the impact that cities have with the asphalt, with all the glass buildings and whatnot. Because actually, it's I can't remember where I read it. I'll have to look this one up, but that was one of the things that was mentioned recently, in that the figures that were given for the global temperature, some of the sites that we used, because they're located within cities, are a couple degrees higher. And actually, once that was realized and it was corrected for, then the impact was found to be a lot lower. But coming back to what you mentioned about CO2 and plant growth, many moons ago, you'll probably remember this, is we were told that talking or singing to your plants was, for some reason, making plants grow more. It wasn't actually the act of talking or singing to the plants. It was they were getting high on the supply of the carbon dioxide that we were giving them, that we were breathing out into the plant's face, essentially. So it's very, very important that that's also mentioned. And you mentioned the impact of coal power plants and tree growth. Actually, it's noted that downwind from coal power plants, the foliage there is a lot bigger than it would be in other areas because of that exact thing, the increased carbon dioxide. And it cannot be emphasized enough. We need carbon dioxide in order for the planet to breathe. Why? Because it's literal food for the plants, and those plants go on to make food for the rest of us. If it wasn't for the trees, if it wasn't for the grass and the greenery getting the CO2 that we're pumping back into the atmosphere, because by getting hold of the fossil fuels, we're getting what's essentially captured carbon within the planet, pulling it back out, burning it up, doing whatever we will to it. And like you mentioned with the coal power plants, cleaning up the exhaust outputs so that it's more so just the carbon dioxide and the water vapor that's heading out. We're doing a service to the plants. If you look at plants in the dinosaur age, they were a lot bigger. The trees were a lot bigger, the megafauna, because of the higher amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which has been a lot higher than the 0.4% that you've already mentioned, or 0.04% that you've already mentioned. But with that said,
can I just jump in there, please, Sonny?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay. While you're correct in saying that we are introducing a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by burning our hydrocarbon fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, whether it be in cars or factories or power stations, we don't affect the level. I want to emphasize that. We do not affect the level in the atmosphere, because if we shut down all carbon dioxide production from human activity, we would only be cutting the carbon dioxide that's liberated into the atmosphere by about 2%. 2%, that's it, or 3%, 2 or 3%. And all that would happen is that nature would release slightly more carbon dioxide from the oceans to take that up, to keep that in its balance. Henry's law tells us that. It's a very important chemistry law that I think was developed in 1903. The partial pressure of a gas above a liquid is in part due to the temperature and in part due to the concentration of gas in the liquid in dissolved form. So what it means is that if you reduce the partial pressure of carbon dioxide above the oceans, because we produce less, the impact is very, very slight, and nature would just offset it by releasing more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That it's very simple. So we do not and we cannot affect the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And as I explained to you, we've had 2 natural experiments in the last 14 years since 2008, which have showed that when we decimate our production of carbon dioxide, cut it dramatically, it still keeps increasing in the atmosphere. So what that means is that we don't have any effect. And what it also means is there's no point in shutting down our industry. There's no point in taxing people for it, because we can't affect it.
Fair. Until you mentioned it there, I'd never come across the impact of the financial crisis and also 2020 as well. I find that fascinating that these are things that, again, we don't find on BBC News, unfortunately. But with that said, I think partially this has already been answered, but what's wrong with the noble lie of us trying to get off of fossil fuels if fossil fuels are in a way a finite resource and then moving on to renewables? What is the big problem then with the noble lie that we need to get off it tomorrow because we're going to destroy the planet? Okay, if there are many thousands of data sets that say we're not necessarily destroying the planet per se, but if we can move off the fossil fuels because the oil for your car, the petrol for your car isn't going to be there forever, let's get onto battery tech or hydrogen fuel cell or what have you, some kind of renewable energy source. What's the inherent problem there?
Sure. Well, inherent problem, first of all, there are many. The first problem is it's a lie. Lies don't stack up. That's totally wrong to mislead people. It's a lie. The second thing is that we didn't run out of stone. The reason we ended the Stone Age was not because we ran out of stones. The reason we ended the Copper Age was not because we ran out of copper. The reason we ended the Iron Age was not because we ran out of iron and steel. We ran out of, we changed, those ages ended because our technology improved. And then the third thing is that the most significant factor in liberating humans, liberating whales, liberating trees, liberating forests, liberating animals has occurred over the last 170 years since the Industrial Revolution. And that is the relentless decline in prices of real energy until about 3 decades ago, when it was artificially increased because of UN policies put in place by the Tories, by the Labour Party, by the Greens, by the Germans, by the Democrats in America, by the Republicans in America, by the Liberals in Australia, by the Labour Party in Australia. We have had a relentless decrease in productivity, in costs of energy in real terms. When energy becomes cheaper in real terms, it's used more. When it's used more, it becomes a massive improvement in productivity. When you have a massive improvement in productivity, you have a massive increase in wealth. Now, in the bad old days, before we started burning coal, oil, and natural gas, we burned forests. We cut down trees and we burnt forests for our cooking, for our heating, because humans have a right to be warm. And we learned how to master fire. So I can't blame anyone for cutting down trees to warm themselves if that's all they've got. I can't blame anyone for killing whales to get whale oil because they wanted lighting. Because when the sun goes down at night, there's no light unless we have whale oil burning, which means killing whales. So the whales and the forests, the biggest protector of whales and forests in the whole history of humankind has been coal, because coal was used to generate warmth, generate electricity for cooking, generate lighting. The other thing about coal is that it's fundamental to making steel. Coal contains carbon, which when you put it in a blast furnace produces a reduction for the iron oxide that we put in as iron ore. You get steel out. Now, steel is in everything. It's in that microphone you're using. It's in your house. It's in the making. I don't know what your materials in your house are made of, but you've got textile curtains by the look of it, white curtains.
Yep.
Let's assume they were cotton. Doesn't matter if they're wool. Doesn't matter if they're synthetic. All synthetic textiles, most synthetic textiles come from coal or oil. So if you look at the cotton was planted with mechanical planters. The cotton was harvested with mechanical harvesters, which are made of steel. The cotton was transported to a gin made of steel. The trucks were made of steel, powered by diesel, which is oil. So everywhere we see the benefits of cheap energy producing steel, cheap energy producing electricity. We see the cost of the cost of petrol in Australia, at least, the cost of petrol in America is cheaper than the cost of bottled water per litre. I mean, it's a phenomenal thing. And we have been told that we're going to run out of oil. Well, that's bullshit, because eventually we might, but we've got hundreds of years of coal left in Australia. We've got hundreds of years of coal left in China, in America, in Russia. We also know that 5 times, when in 1975 I was studying at university, and our professor told us 5 times since the turn of the century that South Africa was forecast to run out of gold. At the time in 1975, South Africa had the highest reserves of gold that it ever had, because all they were doing was going deeper and further underground to get it. So same with coal, same with oil, same with natural gas. There are far more reserves. We're not going to run out anytime soon. But the other thing, if you go back to us, the Stone Age ending, not because we ran out of stones, but because of technology, we will come up with something else before we run out of coal to replace coal. I don't think it'll be solar, and I don't think it'll be wind, because they're inherently inefficient and very, very expensive, and they will always be that way because of physics. But it's very, very important that we use the cheapest form of energy available, providing it's environmentally responsible, it's safe, and healthy. And coal and oil and natural gas are exactly that. And so if we use anything other than the cheapest, we will have lower standards of living, we'll have less human progress. What's happened in the last 3 years, Sonny, the last 30 years, is that we have artificially increased the cost of coal, oil, and natural gas because of stupid government policies that the UN is pushing on us, thanks to the global bankers that want to control the use of our energy for their own vile means, their own vile ends.
There's a lot to unpack there, especially what you say there about the reserves aren't ending anytime soon yet. What we're seeing is the price is exponentially going higher to the point where it is becoming difficult for people to live and for people to survive. There are many people I know that aren't making it to the end of the month with the salary that they've been making it to the end of the month with money to spare to put in their savings, because of the fact that the fuel prices are going up, so that not only is their journey to work become more expensive, but also their energy bills at home have become more expensive as well because of these increases in prices, despite the fact that energy companies are seeming to have record profits. Now, for someone like Centrica, part of that is admittedly to do with selling off some of their other assets. However, regardless, there is still a lot of profit share that's being taken up by the big energy companies. But with that being said, then, one of the last things you said was, once there's a viable alternative where we can have a cheaper energy source, which can continue to create prosperous growth for the majority rather than the few, which is what's happening with coal, oil, and gas to this point. There are a few people massively benefiting while the rest of us are seeing the fuel prices or the energy prices going up to a month's wage at least. Why is something like nuclear not being discussed or used? So far as I can tell, it seems to be a great viable alternative. All the research that I've done digging into it, it seems like a sensible idea, especially with the new reactors and technologies that we have, and the fact that what we've seen is we can recycle the used nuclear fuel to be put back in, and that has now increased the productivity of a nuclear reactor. And as technology increases, those used fuel cells are going to be reusable again. So you've got potentially almost unlimited usage of your fuel rods. Can you maybe dig into that a little bit?
Yes, I can. What you're saying makes perfect sense. The reason is they don't want us to have energy. They don't want us to have cheap energy. They want to increase the price of energy so that we use less of it. That's how they control us. Henry Kissinger, who's a infamous, I would say infamous globalist, he's still alive. He's nearly 100, I think, years of age. He once said, if you control the energy, if you control the property, if you control the resources, you control the people. This has never been about climate. It's never been about the environment. It has been about taking money from the poor and the middle class and taking it to the wealthy and redistributing wealth. And Maurice Strong said that. One of his two aims was to introduce, put in place an unelected socialist global government. Socialists transfer money from a target to their beneficiaries. That's what they do. This is nothing new. We've seen this time and time again. Their ultimate goal is to cut use of energy. They don't want you to have cheap energy. They want to make it expensive. We had a prime minister here in this country who actually admitted that these things would increase the cost of energy. And no one actually thought about what she said.
Who was this?
The United Nations has said this, that they want to reduce the use of energy. Sonny, the most important thing that's happened in the last 170 years has been the relentless decline in energy prices, liberating whales, liberating animals, liberating humans, making life easier, longer, safer, more productive. You've got more choices. You can go to Wales for the weekend. You can go to Paris for the weekend. You can do whatever you want. You can educate yourself better now. We can buy these things if we want, iPhones. We've got so many choices, all because of human creativity and care, thanks to turned into material benefits through cheap, efficient, environmentally responsible electricity. What they want to do is they want to reverse that. And you said it a little while ago. You used that word feudalism. Hundreds of years ago, people were controlled because they're a feudal society. The Lord Baron looked after, owned all the land, all the resources. He gave each of us a little plot of our ancestors, a plot of dirt to eke out a living. He took most of what we produced, left us enough to survive and just eke out a living, and he kept the rest. Then we had the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, and we had prosperity flourished, and we had the development of the middle class, and that middle class wanted freedom, and they got their freedoms, and we got our freedoms. The globalists, they want us put back in our little boxes, back in our places, so that we basically provide for them. They want us to be little cogs in a factory, their factory, and they want to control our energy. They want to control our water. They want to control our resources. They want to control how we live. I mean, this is nothing new. This is not me saying this. This is the UN saying this. The World Economic Forum saying this. The World Economic Forum says, what do they say? You will own nothing and you'll be happy. I mean, this is lunacy, but they're doing it right in front of our eyes. And
Yeah.
so there was a point I was going to mention in there. That's right. It's a deliberate attempt to increase the cost of energy, to decrease the use of energy, our access to energy, so that they control us. Just like they're stealing our property rights, just like they're controlling our water, just like they're controlling how we live, the regulations to do with how we live, how we eat, what we eat. They're even going after cutting back our food production, our meat and protein they want to cut. In Australia, we have the world's largest continental shelf fishing zone. We have a tiny population of 25, 26 million. We import, for goodness sake, 3/4 of the seafood we eat. We should be sharing our seafood with the world. But why? Because the United Nations has shut down our coastline. 36% of the world's marine parks are in Australia's coastal zone. 36%, more than 1/3.
Wow.
And that's what they're doing. Where do we import our seafood from? Number one exporter for our seafood is China, which has 60-something times the population, tiny coastline. The second major exporter of seafood for us is Thailand, which has a population 3 times ours and a tiny, tiny coastline. This makes no sense because it is illogical, because it is a lie. All it is about control. And the Chinese are saying to the UN, stick your control. We'll export whatever seafood we want. The Thais are saying the same. We are the dopes in the West, the British, the Europeans, the Canadians, the Americans, the New Zealanders, the Australians. We're the ones swallowing this crap and stifling our population. Russians, Brazilians are saying go to hell.
So the BRICS countries are saying go to hell. I think it's less so the fact that we as the individuals in these nations, Europe, North America and Australia, New Zealand are the plebs. It's that our leaders, those in power, are deciding to go along with it. And you see that in what's happened over the last couple of years. You see that it's those particular nations actually that went hard in the paint for any element of control that could be used. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, within Europe, Germany, Italy went hard in the paint on their lockdowns, on their controls with passports. And yet the BRICS countries, Brazil, India, China not so much. They also went hard in the paint, to be fair. But Brazil, Russia, India, they didn't really follow that pattern. South Africa, they didn't follow that pattern of just doing what they were told. But you say that they're trying to take away our energy now that I think it's pretty well established that it's the World Economic Forum and the UN. And actually, if anyone wants to back check that, you can find agreements online between the UN and the World Economic Forum that they're working together towards Agenda 2030. As you mentioned, you will own nothing and you will be happy. That's actually a World Economic Forum slogan for 2030, which just happens to be the UN Agenda 2030, all wrapped up into one nice little bouquet for us. But as you mentioned, they don't want us to have energy. They don't want us to have great usage of energy. But then we have this offer of renewables on the table. Now, you mentioned that renewables, as it stands, aren't great, whether it's wind or solar. And I saw a great little meme that was someone walking past a farm, open farmland, saying, "Oh God, look at all this pollutant, horrible stuff." And then the next picture was them walking past a solar farm and a wind farm, and it's completely ruined the landscape, saying, "Oh, that's much better. That's beautiful, non-toxic stuff." But what is it about the renewable energies that's not so great, not all it's cracked up to be?
Well, number one, what's not good about solar and wind is that they increase the cost of energy. And we've just explained that the humanity and human progress flourishes when you reduce the cost of energy. These are reversing that trend of human progress. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, sorry?
How is it that solar, when you think I could have a solar panel, how does that increase my energy prices?
Because the amount of resources that go into solar and wind is huge. That's the first side of it. So the cost of producing them is enormous. And to give you an example, for a unit of energy, unit of electricity from a coal-fired power station, it takes about 35 tons of steel. For the same unit of electricity out of a wind turbine requires 546 tons of steel.
Wow.
If you look at the energy that goes into making a wind turbine, it is huge. If you look at the carbon dioxide that is produced over the life cycle of a wind turbine, the carbon dioxide, because of the huge consumption of materials into a wind turbine, they actually save less carbon dioxide than it takes to produce them over the life cycle. They only have a short life, 15 years.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with carbon dioxide. Let me make that clear. But they're saying we need to cut back on our carbon dioxide. Wind turbines increase carbon dioxide overall, not save carbon dioxide. So it's a lie they're telling us. So the sheer number of resources that goes into producing that electricity. The second thing, the other side of it, is that there's less electricity produced. The energy density of nuclear is huge. The energy density of coal is pretty damn big. Coal and oil and natural gas. The energy density of a wind turbine is trivial. It's trivial. You can't get the energy out of the damn thing. Solar panels, even more the same. Now, wind turbines actually chop up the environment because they cause, first of all, ultrasound resonance, which hurts humans and hurts animals. They chop up birds. They only last 15 years. Then you've got to dispose of them, and they're not recyclable. This is an enormous waste of resources on our planet. Then, because the wind doesn't blow all the time, you need to get a certain amount of energy out. You need to have a huge number of wind turbines because they're not blowing all the time. Then you need to add batteries. And batteries are a huge consumer of resources, even more so than wind. So the cost now is ballooning out. The cost of wind turbines, if you can get the electricity out of the wind turbines, it can be made roughly one-on-one, same with the coal-fired power stations, similar costs. But by the time you have to increase the number of wind turbines to account for the fact that you don't get the wind blowing all the time, it's about 2 to 3 times the cost of coal-fired power station or nuclear. And then when you include the batteries, you're in pixie land. And so if you then look at solar panels, they're exactly the same. They're not disposable, they're not renewable, not recyclable. They have a very short life, 10 to 15 years. A power station and coal-fired power station, 50 years. Nuclear power station, longer. I mean, it is absurd what we're doing. The costs are inherently high because of the huge number of materials going into them. The energy density coming out of a solar panel is trivially low. It'll never, ever make sense. If you look then at the recycling, the environmental costs. When we mine coal in Australia, if we disturb the land, we have to put a bond in for disturbing that land. And then when we finish mining, we have to reclaim it to get that bond back. Okay, a mining company has to get that bond back. There's no bond for solar and wind, none at all. You can destroy the environment, level good farming land, neuter good farming land. You can destroy the trees, the forests. You don't pay a bond, and at the end, who's going to dispose of them? No one. They're going to be ghastly intrusions on our environment for decades.
The other thing that people don't seem to talk about is the fact that to produce your solar panels and your batteries, because like you mentioned, anyone using the renewables for a long-term source of power will need the batteries, is the conflict minerals. So if you're doing this out of some altruistic nature for the earth and for people, actually your use of conflict minerals is just making things a hell of a lot worse. But then I'm also cognizant that we're a little bit short of time now. One thing that we haven't really touched on, which is integral to all this as it pertains to the bigger picture of the World Economic Forum and the UN, is that usage of land that you mentioned there right at the end. So one thing that we're seeing here in the Netherlands, something that we saw happening in Sri Lanka, and we've now seen the end results of that about 3 weeks ago, is that the UN has these ESG scores that are being used on different countries, and one of the things that's being done is the nitrogen usage within fertilizers and having that being limited, and also limiting the usage of what farmers can do with their own farmland, how much cattle they can have, all these sorts of things. How does this play into climate change? And where does this play into that usage of land?
Well, you've just belled the cat. They're wanting to control our rights to use land. When we buy land, we don't buy the dirt. We buy the right to use that land for whatever purpose we want. When they put constraints on that purpose, that constrains our rights to use the land. They're constraining our rights to use the land we own. They're constraining our rights to use our property. They're stealing our property rights. That is it, full stop. And it's well known, the communists have said this for a long time. If you want to get control of a population, you steal their rights to use their land. You remove their religion. You destroy the family. And then when people don't have a family to turn to, they turn to the government. And in the case of the UN, they want the government to be an unelected socialist global governance. Same with the World Economic Forum. You will own nothing and you will be happy. We will take care of you. Bullshit. It's complete fabrication. But it's just to get control, because the people who want to seek that control are the same people that control the globalist corporations that are owned by the same families. The BlackRocks, the Vanguards, there's another major company too, I've forgotten. They own just about everything around the world as it is. And they're controlled by a handful of families. They own the United States Federal Reserve Bank. It's not a government entity, it's a privately owned bank. They manipulate the money supply around the world. They are controlling everything. So what was the other part of that's right, land rights. So they're controlling our energy. They want to control our energy, and they want to control things and give them farmland. Thank you. They've been doing it here in this country for some time. They're making up the myth that cattle farting and cattle burping will destroy our climate because it's a carbon dioxide coming out of both ends of the animal. It's rubbish. The impact of human carbon dioxide on the planet is negligible. But what they want to do is get control of our food production. They want to stop us eating protein. I told you about what they're doing with their fish in this country, and in Western countries similar. They're wanting to stop us eating beef, lamb, and pigs. They're wanting to stop that. They're wanting to put in place the eating of bugs. I mean, this sounds fanciful, but we've seen it in their own words. We've seen it in their own policies. The Bill Gates is notorious for what he's done around the world with killing people with the COVID vaccines, COVID injections, is the biggest landholder in the United States.
Yep.
They're wanting to put in place the factories producing bugs. Why? Because they're not as weather dependent. And that, by the way, is something else to think about. Solar and wind depend upon the weather. Here they are telling us the weather's going to hell. They want to make us our production of energy more dependent on the weather, which is just nonsensical. But they're wanting to take the production of food away from farmers, which does depend upon the weather to some extent, much, much less because of our technology than it used to be, but still does depend on that. They're wanting to take that away. They're wanting to take away the distributed production of food in many individual farmers and put it in massive corporations so that what you eat will depend upon how you behave. In other words, they will put in place an unelected socialist global governance. They're already talking about putting in place an electronic digital currency globally. Yep. Then what they'll do is get rid of cash. This is their plan. They've told us this. This is not me making it up. This is their plan. When they get rid of cash, you'll have no alternative. Then they'll control their digital currency. And Sonny, if you own a four-wheel drive, you won't get a loan for a house. If you want a loan for a house, you'll have to stop saying what you're doing. You'll have to stop these independent podcasts. We just can't accept it anymore. And so what they're wanting to do is to control us in everything we do, everything we say, every action, including our food. And they want to put us on a social credit system so that if you want to eat, you will comply. And complying means working your guts out, just like back in feudalism, so that you eke a tiny, tiny benefit from your work, and they get all the proceeds. They're wanting us back in slavery, back in feudalism. That's their goal.
Yeah, earning a meager living. And I think, what you've said there with the central bank digital currency, with the digital IDs, with the social credit scoring system, it's all there for people to read within the UN's papers, within the World Economic Forum's papers. But I think that's probably as good as any point for us to wrap things up on, that they are trying to go for the food supply. They are trying to go for our land. They're trying to go for the energy. But Malcolm, any last little bits you want to leave the listeners with before we wrap this up?
I think, yes, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for having me on. We can't trust the media. The same globalist predators who own Vanguard, BlackRock, own the media. They're only telling us their side, their story. So it's very, very important what you're doing. The second thing is, and the last thing I'd say is that for those who find this incredible, if you had told me this before I started researching 12 years ago, I would have laughed at you. I would have thought you're a lunatic. But I found it in my own research. I found it in the Senate. It's happening in our country. I've watched it happening in Britain. I've watched it happening in America. The same forces are going around the world. If you don't think that there are people who want to control you, have a look at history. Have a look at the Adolf Hitlers, the Genghis Khans, the Alexander the Greats, the Stalins, the Lenins, and you'll find people within the church system who want to control. That's what the church was so big on. It was about some of the churches so big on control. You find it in politics. You'll find it in football clubs. You'll find it in sporting clubs. You'll find it in social clubs. A few people want to control. And what we've got now is a massive opportunity to control. And I'll leave you with this. Harry F. Truman, the president of the United States president, said he was the most well-read president ever. Most American presidents aren't that well-read because their country is so powerful. They don't need to worry about overseas when they're growing up. Harry F. Truman said, "The only thing new in the world is the history you have not read." The only thing new in the world is a history you've not read. In other words, it's all happened before. What we are seeing has happened before. Attempts at global scale have never come off, but this is now they've got the technology to try and do it. The biggest thing we need to do is wake up. We just need to wake up. We need to stop voting for the tired old parties, the Tories, the Labour Party. Need to vote for fresh parties, independents. Get independents into Parliament, minor parties into Parliament who will speak for you, because these people, the World Economic Forum is bragging that it controls many people in many parliaments around the world. Britain, you've got graduates. Boris Johnson's a bloody graduate from the World Economic Forum New Leaders Program.
Yep.
And the social credit systems, the digital platform come from the World Economic Forum. That's how they're putting these in place. The climate alarm, the climate alarm, that's coming from the UN. They're just vehicles. The UN was formed to be a vehicle for the globalist predators. That is quite clear. So what we've got to do is wake people up, share the words, keep broadcasting, doing what you're doing, and vote for people who are out of in small parties, so that we get a fresh voice in Parliament, and we get parliaments and congresses responding to the people.
Beautifully said. Really appreciate those words. It's a lot of food for thought, and I think it's true in that the independents work way more for the individuals' rights than the larger parties, as for them, they're already well established in the larger parties. They don't need to work hard to gain anyone's trust because they're Labour or they're Tory. But Malcolm, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll get to speak to you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sonny. I appreciate the way you do your research. It really is so respectful for other people. Thank you.